Hello everyone. So this is the first video lecture on the chapter of lifespan development. Because this is a survey course, right? So the general psychology as a survey course means it has basically introduces you to the whole range of different psychological topics. This is the introduction to human growth and development. And some of you may have already taken human growth and development, so you will find most of this stuff familiar. In the other sequence, typically we would do psychology would be a prerequisite to human growth, because basically when we talk about lifespan development, what we're talking about is the psychological development over the course of life, right? So beginning with conception and how all those other elements that we've talked about, cognition and the brain structures and emotionality, how those change throughout our biological life. Okay, so this is your introduction to developmental psychology. Developmental psychology has three major issues or questions. The role of the relationship between nature and nurture, which I'm afraid my courses are going to get confused in my head, so I may have assumed we've already talked about this. Nature nurture, which is sort of like the relationship between our biology and our social experiences. Continuality and stages. So this is the philosophical question or understanding how we move from birth to death. As it is it just a change? Are things just changing in this sort of continuation, or are there distinctive stages? Do we go from, I think it's on the next slide. So it's sort of the question about, our can our life be described as a seedling to a redwood tree, or is it more like we go from being a caterpillar to being a butterfly? That would be like stages. Or is it okay? And then the third one is the stability and change. I think I will queue up, or I'll put in your Canvas shell, a scale. And again, if you've had human growth, you'll have seen this scale already, but it asks you to consider, your philosophical impression of our people. Which of these, nature nurture is more important? Are people more or less likely to change? Are people basically the same when they're a child as they are when they're adult? And what we learned is, what the research tells us is that in some ways, yes, we are some of the things that we see in childhood, will remain the same over the course of our life, but there are also a lot of things in childhood that will change. We'll also observe, or researchers have observed, that in some elements of the human life course, our biology, our genes are most important, and other elements of life, our environment, our nurture is more important. So the conversation, or the study of life course development begins at conception, begins at conception. And if you think about that, a baby girl is born with all the eggs that she will ever have. It is even at conception that the characteristics of her children are already influenced because of okay, that's getting off. So this is a cool image. If you have not been made aware or seen, a relational image of how very, very small the sperm is compared to how very, very large the egg is. Often when we hear descriptions about the sperm and the egg, we hear of it as if the sperm is sort of, the one that it does make everything happen, but that it's sort of the dominant actor. But if you think about if we look at it like this, we're sort of challenged to consider that maybe the egg is I don't want to say the biggest or the most powerful, but the chooser. And in essence, one of the things that we do know about conception is that the egg will allow certain sperm to penetrate the membrane, and then she will lock out other sperm. So in that sense, she does kind of select her sperm. I guess the question really is the language that we use when we describe the fertilization process, you know, and not to give either the sperm or the egg too much, I guess we'll say, credit. Some words here that are important, and again, I've tried to bold the words that are likely to show up on a quiz or likely to be me to ask you about later on. This isn't a biology class, so simply understand that we have half the genes, half the DNA in the sperm. We have half the DNA in the eggs. We have fertilization. The first stage is what we would call a zygote, which you see over here. After a certain number of cell divisions, we are that stage is considered an embryo. Beyond in the human growth class, I have it broken down by days. I don't in this class. We move to a fetus, but a fetus is not viable, cannot live outside the womb. But there is evidence that suggests that the fetus has begun to respond to environmental experiences. So what we mean by evidence in the womb, and this is some evidence of learning in the womb, is that there is responsiveness to the mother's voice. When babies are born, they cry in the same accent as their mother. So in my sociology class, I asked the question, when does socialization begin? When does a person begin to learn about their environment? And the answer, I believe, is before birth, not after birth. And some of that is supported by this early evidence of womb, this early evidence of fetal understanding and fetal responsiveness. That word there is a big category of basically toxins or things that are bad that can cause developmental imperfections to the unborn. Of course, one that you may already be familiar with, that's fetal alcohol syndrome. That's when a pregnant person has ingested enough alcohol during their pregnancy that it can cause alterations in facial structure. One of the most probably from visible ones is it's often like a flat face. It's often a flat nose bridge. Eyes are wider apart. But it also comes with some cognitive impairments. But there are lots of teratogens. My human growth class, I ask people to identify some in their life. They would include some that students have acknowledged or recognized in their own lives, or if their spouse works at the battery factory. Stress is a teratogen, caffeine, nicotine, prescription medicines, litter boxes, some sort, I forget what that one was called. But there are lots of things in the environment that when we are pregnant, and so often women don't know that they're in the early stages of pregnancy, and so they may not know that things that are in their daily life are poisonous because they don't know that they're pregnant. Okay. The next slide is about prenatal development and the newborn. Basically, what this slide suggests is that babies are not born dumb. They're born knowing lots of things. The textbooks refer to some of these as reflexes, not instinct. There's a difference. But one thing that babies, a healthy, cognitively fully developed newborn shows evidence of understanding, and that's two of them are called the rooting reflex and the sucking reflex, and these are thought to be leftovers from our ancient ancestors, where a baby will turn towards the breast or will turn towards, like if you if you were to touch the baby's cheek, that the baby will turn, and then if you put something in their mouth, that they will suck. And they don't have to learn this; they're born knowing this. Hence, we call those reflexes. I'm actually going to stop here because we're at 10 minutes, and I'm going to pick up in the next slide right here in the middle of this one, talking about a phenomenon called habituation.